Why are there so many shows starring Muppets and dozens of movies too? They said they'd watch everyone and they mean it. It's something that they've got to do. So now they've pledged you a lifelong commitment. The Muppets, Matthew and Sam.
Welcome to Kermitmnet, the podcast where two friends have vowed to watch all things Muppets. I'm Matthew Gatos.
And I'm Sam Schultz.
And this week we watched Tales of Tinkerdee and The Land of Tinkerdee. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
And we also watched every single Muppet TV appearance that we could possibly find on YouTube from the 1960s. So many TV appearances.
So many of them are the same thing also.
They do a lot of the same sketches. How you feeling about the TV sketches, I guess? Like, was that fun to watch?
It was not too punishing to watch all of them, even when they were the same thing over again. Overall, it was mostly just kind of watching a bunch of people workshop new ideas, which I thought was really fun.
I felt largely the same way, where it was not a chore to get through these in any way, but I am sort of happy to be moving on from some of them.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how much they do Glowworm and other things into the 70s. I know, like, some of these things pop up on the Muppet Show from time to time. But as much as I enjoy some of these, I won't miss having to watch 4 different versions of I've Grown Accustomed to Your Face.
Oh, I think it will be out of our lives forever soon. Also, like, we'll talk about this way more.
Yeah.
I think there was a sweet spot in the mid 60s that I was really enjoying, and then by the time it got to the 70s, I started to feel like it was some of their stuff they had done so many times that it was a little smoothed out to the point where it wasn't very interesting, and there were a couple that I think just didn't work at all. But
I think we're going to be in the same boat on that.
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
this
cool.
is sounding like my internal monologue coming out of somebody else's mouth right now, because I feel exactly the same way. But yeah, before we get too far into that, I guess I was wondering, are these early appearances, both in the Tinkerdee things and on the TV appearances, are they changing your feelings about Jim Henson and the Muppets at all? Like, aside from just the historical context of understanding where some of these things came from, are you feeling any different about your love of Muppets?
To me, the Tinkerdee stuff feels like what I like from the Muppets. And that was really early. Like, they had done that right after Sam and Friends ended, basically. Like, that was their next big planned project, it seems like. Then they started doing these TV appearances. And when they do the TV appearances, they are much more like working artists, kind of, or like, you
It's
can
like there's
kind
a
of watch
spectrum
them.
of like the Tales from Tinkerdee, then you have the TV appearances, and then you have the commercials. And like the TV appearances are closer to like doing things for the job.
And when they show up in interviews, when the actual puppeteers are there, they're very like buttoned down and business-like, and they're explaining their Oscar nomination in a lot of detail, a lot more detail maybe than the audience is interested in. So, and the fact that they're doing the same skits over and over again, more than I had ever realized, they were like an act. Because the Muppet Show doesn't feel so chaotic, and watching them do the same thing over and over again really like hammers home, oh, these were people who were like at the top of their game, perfect timing on all things, and they just sat and practiced this all the time, and like this was their job in a way that I've never thought about it.
Yeah, and you even see that they flounder a little bit. Flounder is maybe too strong of a word, but when it comes to improvisation, there's a couple moments where specifically Jim Henson as Rolf is just like, I don't know what you want from me. Like,
Yeah, I do like that he just says that too.
Yeah, he's like, I don't have material for this. Like, I can't be an improv comic. That's your job. I'm the dog who has a script. Like,
I mean, I think mostly what you're referring to is the Mike Douglas show, right?
Yeah.
And there are moments on the Mike Douglas show where everybody is clearly floundering, and
Yeah.
Mike Douglas is not the most gifted improv person, I don't think. And I would
No.
get really mad because he would interrupt them in the middle of like a pre-prepared thing. And it would be like, they haven't told the joke yet. You dipshit. Let them
He
tell the
interrupts
joke.
people not only to stop them from telling the joke, but at times, I want to talk about this a little bit more later too, he interrupts like very serious, important stories to be like, we gotta move on. It's time for a Muppet. And you're just
Yeah.
like, now's not the time, Mike.
Yeah. There's one particularly glaring one that I think we'll talk about. Matt, did it change how you have seen the Muppets and Jim Henson and company?
Yeah, because I think, again, we'll talk about this in more detail, but some of them don't land quite as well. And you can kind of see when we're watching them through chronologically when things change, when things get better, when things maybe... We talked last episode about when Jim Henson went to Europe or whatever for like the Puppet Festival and came back a different man. And I think you can really see that in these clips because of what Jim Henson is finding important in the performances before mid-60s versus like the end of the 60s. And it's just, I don't know, it's fascinating to watch because of that, and also to just really get the context of how much these things were for adults, because they're putting them on late night talk shows, and then they're also revealing the magic. Like, it's not like you don't watch Sesame Street and at the end of each sketch the puppeteers underneath Bert and Ernie stand up and it's like, hey, how's it going? And that's kind of how most of these segments end, is the Ed Sullivan or Jack Parr or whoever will invite Jim and Jane or whoever is out there to come over and like say, hey, like, this is who's behind this. This is the genius, as I think they call him multiple times. And it's interesting to see that context where I think in my head, I didn't realize that Jim Henson was such a face. I guess I didn't realize Jim Henson was immediately out in the public eye attached to this. I thought it was sort of like the Muppets became famous, and then people were sort of asking, who's behind this? Who's the man who is Kermit? And that's how he became famous. Whereas, like, no, pretty much since the beginning, it has been Jim Henson out there talking about the Muppets on talk shows. And so that is very interesting. But then
by the time we were old enough to start watching this stuff or like start absorbing it, that wasn't the case anymore. Like,
well, he was also not alive anymore.
Well, but I think they lean more towards Kermit as a real guy. Like, and
I think there's something to that is I think a much bigger discussion of sort of the current crop of Muppet performers versus this early stage of Muppet performers, where people are essentially now playing a role that Jim Henson originated. Yeah. And so no one is expected to be, and thus no one can be, the next Jim Henson, because it'd be like trying to bring somebody in to be the voice of Mickey Mouse, and it's like, you're the new Walt Disney, go. And you're like, whoa, I can't be Walt Disney. And I think that's sort of, it feels so different now because Jim Henson is literally like irreplaceable, not just in a voice performer kind of thing, but in the spirit of it all. And so Matt Vogel, Steve Whitmire, like, these guys can be good Kermits, but they're not making them Kermit and also Jim Henson. Right.
They're not going to sit down and have a conversation about where like their inspiration comes from and
it's like you don't get the performer job and then suddenly you're the president of the company. That's just true. Because you're the new Kermit. Yeah. Like, it doesn't come hand in hand as much as it used to when it was Jim Henson, Muppets, he's Kermit, he is this thing. And so I think I'll be fascinated to watch more things from that time period of the early 90s when that shift was happening, to see how the TV appearances change and how the focus becomes more on the character than the performer.
Yeah, I think it's really nice too that this version of the Muppets, because it's not separating the artist from the art, but I feel like that is what Disney did, like, immediately. It's just my perception of it might be totally wrong.
I think you're right. And I think it was at the same time, I didn't realize when I was starting to plan out some of these spreadsheets that I've created for us, the one thing I'm noticing is that in the 90s, which isn't surprising to anyone who lived through the 90s, Elmo is the most popular Muppet across all platforms. Like, and Elmo is the one who's largely doing a lot of these appearances on the Rosie O'Donnell show and everything else. And the Sesame Street Muppets become a much bigger deal in the 90s than the Muppets. And like Big Bird is always kind of been famous and popular, but
Right.
the shift really switches over to Elmo in the 90s.
But at that point, they were owned by two different companies. So
Yeah, but I think to the public eye,
Yeah.
there is not a big distinction
No.
between the two. I think we'll get into that more of that too as we go along, of like when Fraggle Rock gets introduced and Dark Crystal and all these things come along, of like these separations of what is a Muppet, what isn't a Muppet, what's owned by Disney, what's not owned by Disney.
Right.
How the heck are we going to watch some of these things that like now it's like, okay, we couldn't see this one TV appearance, but later on it's going to be like, oh, this important movie or TV episode that we need to watch for our podcast, it just isn't available anywhere because nobody owns it or nobody cares enough about it to make it streaming. On that note, what we watched today, we watched The Tales of Tinkerdee, The Land of Tinkerdee, all these TV appearances. Sam, do you want to tell us what those are?
In 1962, a year after Sam and Friends ended, Jim and his band of Muppeteers put together a pilot for a new show called The Tales of Tinkerdee, or Tales of the Tinkerdee. They say both in the show. The title of the show is different than what Kermit's saying, but anyway.
That's why I didn't get picked up. They were like, you can't even,
Yeah.
you don't even know the name of your own show. We're not picking up that pilot.
I mean, I almost feel like they walked in and somebody had painted the sign wrong, and they were just like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess we got to run with this. Kermit is our musical guide. He's like a little bard in this, to the wacky, magical kingdom of Tinkerdee. In this particular episode, Tamanilla Grinderfall, the witchiest witch of them all, finds out that she isn't invited to Princess Gwendolinda's birthday party, so she schemes with her ogre lackey Charlie, who's played by just a guy's feet, standing behind all the puppets, to sneak into the castle and steal all her presents without King Goshposh or his sidekick, the Prime Minister, finding out. She inevitably fails and is sent to the dungeon to eat thousands of peanut butter sandwiches that the Prime Minister mistakenly ordered for the birthday party. That pilot wasn't picked up, so in 1964, the Muppets Inc. retooled the show and tried again with a show called The Land of Tinkerdee. And instead of like a fast-paced Rocky and Bullwinkle kind of comedy show, they put together a slower, more traditionally kid-friendly show starring just a guy named Daryl, who is a human, and the gatekeeper of Tinkerdee and his dog Rufus. So I assume every episode took place in like their little workshop and people would come in with different problems for them.
I think that was kind of the plan, was that it was going to be a daily children's show where you're kind of introduced to the world of Tinkerdee through the eyes of Daryl.
Yeah, Daryl. So in this one,
Daryl.
King Goshposh, who was the main character in the other one, who's now a Southern gentleman instead of just Rolf, comes in with a problem. His grandfather's antique pocket watch is slow. So Daryl and Rufus try to fix it, but they screw it up royally. And then the episode ends with them still not having fixed it, but about to fix it. And that's that, pretty much. Rufus is basically Rolf, but also a baby. And I love him so much. He's
Rufus
so
the
cute.
dog is very, very cute. And also, yeah, like he has a different personality than Rolf, but is also, in some points, very similar to Rolf from like Jimmy Dean's show Rolf.
He's got the same voice. So
Yes.
there's that. The one of like 3 voices that Jim Henson can do. And then we also watched all of their 60s TV appearances. So throughout the 60s, I think based on the popularity first of the Wilkins commercials and then based on the super popularity of Rolf's permanent spot on the Jimmy Dean show, Jim Henson and Frank Oz and Jerry Jewell and Jane Henson sometimes made a ton of TV appearances, usually on variety shows. Usually they would do like a little short skit like Inchworm or stuff that they did on Sam and Friends. But the meat of what we watched is a week of appearances in July of 1966 where the Muppets were the co-hosts of the Mike Douglas show, and they basically just like popped up throughout the show, mostly Rolf, to interact with guests and do little skits. Also, the skits that we watched included early appearances by well-known characters like the monsters who would become Grover and Cookie Monster, and by the end of the 60s, Sesame Street was new and a big deal, and characters like Big Bird started popping up on the TV shows too.
I know we had billed this as the TV appearances from the 60s, but some of the 70s, the early 70s got folded into that because they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show through 1971. I didn't want us to have to come back and talk about like one Ed Sullivan Show episode, so I just lumped them in with what we're watching.
Yeah.
With what we watched for today's episode. So
Well,
yeah, some of those.
It's an interesting gradient to superstardom for them, I think, too.
Oh yeah, like that post Sesame Street thing is very interesting to see. I think from both a popularity standpoint and also just a style of character and puppet that comes along around that same time is really interesting. But yeah, going back to the Tinkerdee specials, unaired pilots, it's really interesting to watch these and think about where that Muppet trajectory could have gone. If Tales of Tinkerdee had been picked up as a children's show and that aired for 5 years, would we have ever gotten The Muppet Show? Would we have ever had Miss Piggy? Would we have ever had Sesame Street? Apparently, there was a quote saying Jim Henson felt that Tamanella Grinderfall was the best Muppet character yet.
I agree with that. She's hilarious.
It's really... The thing I found interesting about Tales of Tinkerdee is that the villain is the main character of the piece, which is just fascinating on its own that they made this whole thing with the villain being the main character. But I think it's also a really good character.
Yeah.
Like, her motivations aren't necessarily surprising for a fairy tale story, but the way she goes about them and her plot and the running gag of her awful disguises that work every time, where
that.
She looks like this little ogre, but if she tosses on a gold wig, everyone's like, oh, it's the princess.
Did she even dress up at all to be Santa Claus, or did she just say she was Santa Claus?
I think she had a beard.
Okay. It was hard to see in black and white.
Yes, which there are color pictures of this production out there, so I think this is probably filmed in color, but maybe the only version that's available to track down is in black and white.
It's a little hard to track all of this stuff that we watched because some of it is in color and some of it's black and white, so you're like, oh, the color stuff must be later, but it'll be like color stuff in 1961 and then a black and white thing from 1969 or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of... money was the main reason that people shot in color or black and white, and I think you hear that a lot in the TV appearances where they'll reference something being a color. And I think on Mike Douglas, I think at one point he says like, oh, I need to tell everyone that your dress is orange because the women like it when I tell people like what color their dress is, because our show's black and white. They can't see their dresses.
That's wild. People's brains must have worked so different back then.
People have no idea what color the set of the Mike Douglas show was or any of these things. What color people's
hair is or
yeah.
But anyway, Tinkerdee.
I think Kermit is interesting because I think this is sort of his first real foray into being the head of the Muppets. Which is interesting, again, that they sort of abandoned that in the 60s where he takes a backseat to Ralph after Ralph becomes famous for the Jimmy Dean show.
Yeah, that's just out of probably the people who hired them said, you got to get Ralph on here because he is what people really want. But yeah, I mean, Kermit literally says he's the leader of the Muppets a couple times in some of the appearances we saw. But in Tinkerdee also, he gets his little frill.
He does have he has like a shirt with a frill, like a collar. I believe it was actually orange in the original version, which I think we see the orange collar pop up later in the Tales of Muppet Land. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is the first time we've seen him with his little fringe.
I've always thought it was maybe a coincidence that he got a fringe later, but I feel like they saw him with the little fringe on, tried the red shirt, and then they thought, you know what? The fringe actually looked pretty good. Let's try to figure something out with that. Because the red shirt looks horrible. He wears a red shirt in all of his appearances in this one.
Yeah, he wears like a turtleneck, and then other times he's wearing sort of like a red shirt with a tie over it. Mm-hmm. When he's weird beatnik Kermit.
Yeah, when he stole Harry the hipster's personality.
Oh boy. Yeah, not successfully either, I would say. But again, it's interesting to think of like, okay, yeah, if you saw Kermit show up on a James Corden now and he's wearing a red turtleneck, there's going to be like a reason he's wearing a red turtleneck because you're like, that's not Kermit.
All I think about is how gooey his skin must be underneath that shirt. Doesn't seem comfortable to wear a shirt.
I think that's part of it too. It's just like as the more they lean into this frog thing, the less the red turtleneck starts to feel like a character trait, which I think over the years the Muppets have gotten very good about clothes telling you a lot about the character. Like you have Gonzo wears his more like silly clothes now, and you have Fozzie just kind of wears the polka dots and the hat.
Big tie,
yeah, and all of them are either useful in telling you a lot about the character, or they're useful props. For Fozzie to take off his hat when he's sad, or when he's entering a church. Yeah. And maybe that's part of it is that they were kind of using Kermit as this everyman of the 60s kind of thing. Like he was just dressing the way people dressed in the 60s, but that doesn't tell you a lot about his character. And again, it's sort of unclear of when he became a frog, In what we watched, the first time you hear it is from Johnny Carson. By the time he's on the Mike Douglas show with Florence Henderson, she is fully calling him a frog. So it was like known, this is a frog.
That one feels really naturally like looking at this character, because Kermit sneaks up on Florence Henderson kind of and she screams.
They scare her twice with Muppets. They scare her with Ralph once, and they scare her with Kermit.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think you'd feel a human being sneaking up behind you, but whatever. She says I wasn't expecting a frog, which to me felt like maybe she didn't know who Kermit was. And if you look at Kermit, he just is a frog, and eventually they had to accept that.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, because it felt like a thing where it could have been just her seeing that and thinking frog.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe they told her before, hey, Kermit the Frog's on here. But it seems like the Mike Douglas show was kind of thrown together in ways where the guests did not even...
Didn't know what the fuck was going on.
It was like they did not expect Muppets to show up. And when they did, they were like, why is there a dog puppet here? And Mike Douglas is just like, oh, you know Ralph. And he's like, I don't know Ralph, though.
The Ralph thing I'll talk about later, too, because that's kind of sad almost to me. But Tinkerdee, the other big thing that I took away from Tinkerdee was that it is Fraggle Rock, basically, especially the land of Tinkerdee to me. Daryl and Rufus's relationship feels like it was recycled for Doc and Sprocket's relationship. Doc's an inventor, and Sprocket's like a dunce who messes stuff up, right? And then the Tales of Tinkerdee stuff feels like the underground Fraggle stuff to me, and looks like it kind of. I would
it's a
imagine.
very like cheaper version of it because they have sort of like the flat wood or cardboard, whatever background design where it's just like stalactites and stalagmites cut out of wood, as opposed to Fraggle Rock. They get the full 3D set.
It looks so freaking good too. I love that. It looks like a living Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon. But I feel like Jerry Jewell had these ideas, probably, is my guess, and then sat on them forever and wanted to do them again. And then when they got a chance to do like this fantasy show, he dug back in and thought, oh, I really liked this relationship between this human and this dog, and I really liked this fantasy world that we built, and kind of like can draw stuff out of these nasty characters, and kind of try to pitch it again. Did you get that feeling at all?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think from what I've read about Fraggle Rock is Jim Henson's ideas were essentially to make a Muppety show that would deal with bigger issues and teach kids lessons in ways that were a little bit more philosophical than Sesame Street and would get a little deeper. But, and maybe this is way off base, but I don't remember reading a lot about him saying, and they must be underground Fraggles with this thing. And I like
that would be weird to say.
Yeah, so I think the idea of like Jerry Jewell coming in and remembering these ideas, because I think you're right, like especially the Doc and Sprocket comparison. As we get into the land of Tinkerdee, they're trying to build out this lore of this world that didn't ever get to really exist in any sort of show, but you have to wonder how that sort of would interact on a regular basis if this did become a full show.
Right. If those were the host segments, and then there would be these like Tales of Tinkerdee style things between them.
Almost in a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood kind of way, totally. Where it's like, and now let's go to the land of make-believe. And I think it might have been something like that, where Daryl's like, oh, you know that story of King Gosh Posh and what he did about the... And it would like cut to a scene of him and the Prime Minister arguing about something. I think there's definitely some seeds of Fraggle in there that last. I think especially when you talk about Taminella's lair, it just feels very Fraggle-y. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what did you think of the land of Tinkerdee as a like very different concept? Because for me, like Tales of Tinkerdee feels like a precursor to a lot of the things Muppets will go on to do with their storytelling and building out fantasy worlds, whereas the land of Tinkerdee is not something they've done quite as much of, where it's a human host with a animal sidekick and not really delving in too much into the fantasy elements.
It's kind of Sesame Street-ish, I guess. It's Oscar, a big bird, talking to the human host of Sesame Street. The Tales of Tinkerdee, one of my favorite Muppet things I've ever seen, I think. It was so funny, and like somehow kept its momentum through like a 25-minute episode or however long it was. The Land of Tinkerdee doesn't work as well. I think it's just a little bit more boring, I guess, because you're really relying on the charisma of Daryl, who doesn't have a ton of charisma, frankly.
No.
He's okay. Not the most dynamic guy. Rufus brings it to the next level for me because I just love Rufus so much. And I think the writing for the puppets was really strong. I mean, it just wasn't as interesting. It felt to me like we have all these pieces. We don't have a lot of money to put this together. So we're just going to try this thing and see if it works. Like, there wasn't as much thought and care put into it.
And I think it's sort of a one-note gag, which, I mean, it's like a 12, 14-minute thing. So they didn't have as much time to build that out. But it really is about what's going to happen to this watch.
And they watch and describe the same thing happen with the watch twice. So
if not 2 or 3 times, I think it was
Yeah.
this repetitive thing of like, look how cool this watch is. And I feel like if this was a Sesame Street sketch, we would have gotten like an animated version of that watch, and we would have gotten to see the cool stuff that they were describing on that watch. But by the second or third time they're talking about the things happening on the watch, and you're not getting to see all the cool things.
Yeah.
It loses the effect.
But yeah, it was fine. It doesn't hold a candle to Tales of Tinkerdee. To me.
No, I think if you have to choose one of those to watch as like something setting up the future of Muppets, Tales of Tinkerdee is clearly the thing that would go on to be more impactful.
Yeah, but this does presage Jimmy Dean, right? Or no, is Jimmy Dean happening right now?
Yeah, this was the same time. It was probably like maybe they didn't want to use Ralph because he was already on Jimmy Dean, so they're like, we need another cute dog. And I think we'll see King Goshposh and Rufus again. I think they both pop up in Hey Cinderella.
Yeah, I looked up Rufus because I had to have more Rufus, and sadly, he never speaks again through it, ever.
He becomes more like Sprocket.
Yeah.
Because Sprocket never spoke either.
Yeah, he plays a big part in Hey Cinderella, but is not a speaking role. He's just he's just like a dog.
That's sad.
Who's still cute, but and then he pops up all the way through to Muppets in Disney World, I think. So he's whenever Rolf is hanging out with dogs, Rufus is there, but he never
makes
speaks
sense.
again. Yeah, but it makes me sad.
It does make me sad.
It would be like they're the same character, so whatever. But
well, and it's also remembering that some of these things never aired. Like,
yeah, that's true.
If they're establishing a canon of Muppets that people are actually seeing, Rufus has never spoken in canon.
That's true. I forgot about that.
So yeah, the fact that Land of Tinkerdee we're even able to watch it is sort of amazing.
Do you know why that? Like, how did this survive?
So a lot of these things seem to be uploaded in waves on YouTube, where some of the things we watched, if we had done this podcast 6 months ago, these things wouldn't be available because some of them are uploaded very recently. But I think these are things that are uploaded after a while. Somebody sees that they're uploaded and flags them for copyright.
Yeah.
They go away, and then later on they come back.
Yeah.
So I know some of the TV appearances are available because, like Ed Sullivan, they released like a Best of Ed Sullivan DVD collection. And so those are ripped from that.
Specifically, Best of the Muppets on Ed Sullivan DVD.
Right, which I think is just all of the Muppets on Ed Sullivan, because they weren't on that many times. But with the Tinkerdee ones, I believe, when I've read about them, they're basically, you can watch them at like the Paley Center or the Museum of Moving Image and stuff. Mm-hmm. But it seems like along the way, someone has ripped them in some capacity and put them out for other people to watch. In not an official way, but in a way where we're watching exactly what you would watch if you went to the Paley Center, because they have the opening part where you see the clapper and stuff, and you see like this is its raw form. I don't know how the people are getting them out of the Paley Center, essentially.
Well, I'm glad that it's out there, because I would really recommend anybody listening to this to watch Tales of Tinkerdee. It's like modern comedy. Like, it aged so well, which is something I think with a lot of these appearances, like the Muppets are funny in a completely different way than all of the guests on all of these shows are. Like, it's such an old-timey comedy versus new-timey comedy, and the Muppets just are like, they seem completely out of place, like they came from the future and are trying to talk to these stodgy, weird old men who have like this like vaudeville idea of comedy.
There's a lot of like middle-aged white men who are famous for some reason, who kind of either sing or have a catchphrase. And that seems like all the shows they were on. So like the shows we watched.
Can I ask you one more thing about Tinkerdee?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that the Prime Minister counts as the first appearance of Scooter?
I think so. I was
He's
thinking that
orange.
same thing. He's got like the yellow-orange skin. His eyeballs are his glasses. He's a nerd. I think he lines up with many things of Scooter, but he's not the same like puppet structure. He looks like maybe like Scooter's brother.
He's more rudimentary than Scooter for sure.
Yeah, but he definitely has a lot of the same sort of elements
Yeah.
of Scooter, which is, I think, something important to note here that I think was very noticeable when we were watching these things in chronological order, is that around this time of everything we're watching, Don Saleen comes on to start making puppets for the Muppets.
Mm-hmm.
So before Don Saleen, you have the Sam and Friends cast and the Tales of Tinkerdee cast. And then he comes in around 62, 63, builds Rolf, and then just, I'm going to give him a lot of credit for a lot of things that maybe he didn't directly do, but as we watch the TV appearances in the mid-60s, it's immediately clear that the puppets are getting better.
Yeah.
And not only more interesting looking, but they have more moving parts. There's more smoke and pyrotechnics happening. And I'm just like, okay, Don Saleen was your best hire that you ever did.
Totally. So I think the first one on the playlist, maybe, or one of the earliest ones, is an Inchworm, like a version of Inchworm. Mm-hmm. Or maybe we talked about this last time. I can't remember. But Inchworm is like, there's these worms coming up to Kermit and he's eating them, and then the last one comes up to him and he eats it, but it's really long and it turns out to be a monster's nose. And when that monster popped up, I bet people back then were like, the monster looks so good. His eyes blink and his big old mouth opens, and I bet people were like, what the fuck? That's a real monster.
Yeah, that and the Scrap Flap skit.
Yeah,
that they
great.
do a handful of times. The first time that one pops up in the playlist is on the Jack Parr program, and that was the first one that really pointed out to me, like, oh, these are different. These are a whole other level of Muppets where their heads can pop off and then the heads pop up out of their bodies and there's smoke coming out of them. And clearly they stepped up their game in like 1963, 1964.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess some context for what they were doing around this time was just mostly commercials otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. Is that was... I mean, they didn't start the Muppet Show until 76 or something, so...
Yeah, and this was also at the same time as the Jimmy Dean Show, so Rolf is doing his stuff.
So I guess that is to say, their puppets were probably way more fancy, because I bet they were flush with cash. They were living in New York, they were on TV all the time, and going to make commercials all the time, and they could afford to have steam start shooting out of their puppets.
Yeah, and I think it really, I think as you see in this... and again, like in many other Muppet things, where Jim Henson's favorite jokes are something gets eaten or something blows up.
Yeah.
And that is very true in many of these, where Glowworm, Inchworm always ends with the big old monster eating Kermit. Scrap Flap is things shooting other things with smoke and shooting their heads off.
That is the ultimate expression of his brand of humor, I feel like. Things die multiple times in Scrap Flap.
Well, and I think also... another one that is a good example, I think, of the way the Muppet Show tends to go as well is sketches that you're not really sure how it's going to end. And then it ends with an explosion. You're like, I should have seen that coming, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a sketch on the Ed Sullivan Show with the sort of early version of Cookie Monster called Monster Eats Machine.
Yeah.
That is a very good sketch,
That's a great one.
There's like this talking recorder computer box that's talking about all of its expensive pieces and how it's irreplaceable and super important. And as the box is saying these things, Cookie Monster, whatever the character's name was then, a monster that's Cookie Monster but with teeth, was eating these expensive pieces of the machine and destroying it. And at the very end, he's eaten the entire machine, and the machine recording is continuing to talk from inside of his stomach and says something along the lines of, like, the primary function of this was a highly explosive device. And then Cookie Monster blows up.
Just explodes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think they were able to do so much more now with, like, one... pyrotechnics, things blowing up, but also there's a sketch on the Ed Sullivan Show that's just called Happy Girl Meets a Monster.
Is that the Beautiful Day Monster?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Beautiful Day Monster one, where it's another thing that feels like something they could not have done previously,
right.
Where this monster keeps like shrinking in size, and it's almost seamless at times where you stop for a second, you're like, did that puppet just got smaller? And yet I didn't even notice the change. And yeah, so I think it's just another example of those things that weren't happening pre-Don Saleen.
Yeah, and then the opposite of that one is the when Ed Sullivan has the little box and he puts it down and the monster band comes out of it. I love that. That's so good.
The rock and roll monster.
Yeah. But another brand of Jim Henson's humor that you see in these early appearances is not humor. It's like the overly heady, like making a statement kind of thing that he does a few times, especially on Mike Douglas with that big face where he's got like a beat poem or something about.
Yeah, there's like Limbo and the Inner Mind, or
The one about having ideas. That's another one, right?
Yeah, that like I started to zone out a little bit. It's like the Idea Man, I think is what they call it.
The Idea Man, that's the one.
It's basically just like a puppeted face over random film footage. Yeah. And you can tell from these interviews, Jim Henson was very interested in editing.
Yeah.
He talks about quick cuts and fast editing.
On the freaking Mike Douglas show, which is a morning, like an afternoon show for like kids who are homesick from school and like housewives in the 60s to watch who don't know what the hell you're talking about. People now wouldn't know what the hell you're talking about. Every episode of the whole week, too, he comes on and talks about this.
It's very clear that this is around the same time he was making his like Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning shorts, and he was very interested in this art film kind of style, which I think is what you were alluding to earlier when you said the late 60s stuff kind of drags a little bit more.
Yeah, he starts to get a little pretentious, I think, as maybe he's wanting to move away from the puppet thing a little bit. And he's just been nominated for an Academy Award, so, like, earned that he's being pretentious. But that was I think a Timepiece is what he got nominated for, right?
Yeah.
Which is doesn't have any puppets in it and is edited extremely quickly, and he's very proud of that, apparently. Fast cuts.
So we started off with the Today Show, which I felt this was a 1961 performance, and they did the Yes We Have No Bananas, and there was a That Old Black Magic performance, and I think
those are just clips from from Sam and Friends too, weren't they? Maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. It felt like they were sort of like throwing to that as if they were there, but it definitely felt like an extension of Sam and Friends, even if it wasn't directly pulled from that.
Yeah.
Like it very much felt like we were still in that same era as last week of sketches, and then it kind of continued on as we went on to the Jack Parr program. You had like I've Grown Accustomed to Your Face, Glowworm, and Scrap Flap, and I think that's the most clear shift because we've seen I've Grown Accustomed to Your Face, we've seen Glowworm. Scrap Flap was entirely new.
Right. When did we see Glowworm first? Does that last
Glowworm,
week?
I think there's a version of that we watched last week. I'm already forgetting. So we were 3 episodes in. I'm already forgetting some of the things we're watching.
I know we talked about it last week, but I can't remember if that was an accident. Like if we were just talking about it indirectly.
You're just getting ahead of ourselves.
Preparation for this one. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, even Glowworm feels more like Glowworm they're not lip syncing to a track, which already is a huge departure from Sam and Friends, because like they're figuring out how to write stuff, or like they hired Jerry Jewell who knows how to write stuff, and they have a puppet that doesn't look like he made it in his garage, basically.
Right. Jerry Jewell to me also is like the most Mad Men character mixed in with the Muppets that I've ever like seen. I don't think I've ever seen really interviews with Jerry Jewell, especially at this era.
Yeah.
But when they like send Jim Henson and Frank Oz off to the side to go set up the whatever sketch they're about to do, and Jerry Jewell's like left there alone, and Mike Douglas asks him like, "So what are we about to see, Jerry?" He's the most like calm, like clearly not like the Jim Henson like selling the Muppets kind of thing. He's like, "I'm the writer. This is what I wrote. You're about to watch it."
It's so great. Me and you are both huge Mad Men fans, right? Is that fair to say of you?
Yeah.
I love Mad Men, and watching this stuff in the 60s made me so like, it's such a missed opportunity that there wasn't an episode of Mad Men where he had to interact with a Muppet type kind of like crew of people. Yeah,
like watching this stuff now and like how ubiquitous the Muppets were in the 60s. I don't even know why that idea didn't happen on Mad Men, because Don Draper trying to do a Wilkins Wonkins commercial.
Oh my God, he would hate it so much.
He would hate it, but he would also like, I like the idea that maybe he shows his kids the Wilkins Wonkins things and they love it because they love them some like, puppets or something.
What do they see in this? Yeah.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the Jack Parr program stuff is that, I mean, they're not particularly mind-blowing or anything, but Jack Parr program was filmed in 30 Rock, so where they still make all those shows. And it was in 1964, while they were waiting to go on to Jack Parr, that they painted all those pipes. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Muppet pipes. That later on became a bigger deal when Jimmy Fallon took over The Tonight Show.
Yeah,
And,
I think they mentioned them in SNL a couple times too, maybe.
Yeah, and I think there's also a Today Show appearance in the 80s or something like that where they go and look at them. But yeah, there was pipes in this closet in their dressing room when they were waiting to go on Jack Parr that they painted and decorated to look like Muppets as pipes.
Yeah.
And for a long time, they were just like behind a door. No one really did anything about it. And thankfully, a few years ago, Jimmy Fallon sort of restored them in a way and has it as sort of a museum piece now that you can walk by on a tour and actually get to see.
Yeah, I think in the 80s they were I think they kind of got rediscovered in the 80s. It looks like they were selling T-shirts and stuff with the Muppet pipes on them in the 80s. But
yeah, I think one of the things I read for in looking at the Grover research for this week's Muppet of the Week segment is that they use some of like Grover's fur as one of the pieces of hair for one of the pipes. So I'm just like, they were just like taking hair off of their
cutting
Muppets.
Grover up. Yeah.
Yeah. Grover wasn't that important yet.
But the Muppet pipes are cool. People should look them up. I don't really believe that they did it all waiting for an appearance on a TV show because it's a lot of work, but whatever.
It also seems like maybe something that they wouldn't have just done without asking.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a lot of work, like you said, and also someone would have been like, "Hey, what are you doing to our pipes?"
Yeah. Or you would have been like, if I touch this pipe, will it be 500 degrees? Will I die instantly if I touch these pipes?
We also watched a show, at least a couple segments of a show called Fanfare with Al Hirt, who Al Hirt seems like a man who was he was a musician. He's the one who made the song Java, which you see the Muppets dancing to with their like laundry, like dryer hose puppets dancing around a Java. And so I think it was a natural thing to work with him. But he's, like a lot of these guys, not necessarily the best host.
No, he was just like like you said, he was like a New Orleans band leader who was really famous around this time for the Green Hornet theme song. Do you know that?
Okay, yeah.
And Java. Java was like a huge selling album.
Right, he was
single.
a famous trumpeter when that was an era that could be a thing.
So in 1965, they gave him a show over the summer to see how it would go. Must not have gone great because he didn't get a show after that. But yeah, he's just like somebody's dad kind of standing there being like, hello, Muppet.
The Muppets are carrying a lot of those moments. So it's one of those where I'm kind of glad we didn't have to watch the full episode of Fanfare to get to the Muppet stuff. I was happy just to watch the Muppet segments. But this was, I think, interesting because it's the first time we see Kermit present himself as the ringleader of the Muppets.
Yeah.
Like, he is there talking to Al Hirt as if he found these acts on the street of like, I brought this.
In Muppet Land, whatever Muppet Land is, they refer to that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things of, like, they kind of use later on with the Hey Cinderella stuff, but it doesn't really become too much of a thing. But you definitely get that feeling for the first time that Kermit is in charge of the Muppets.
Yeah, I think they call him like the brain behind the Muppets or something at some point in that. Yeah.
Which, again, I think it's so interesting that we don't have some of these other TV appearances. Like the Today Show, for instance, they were on the Today Show weekly throughout the 60s, pretty much. Yes, like they were on the Today Show a ton throughout the 60s, and we just the footage isn't out there. We can't see it as of right now. Hopefully, at some point, maybe it'll show up.
I think Florence Henderson co-hosted the Today Show for a while, so she must have known Kermit before.
Maybe, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of those things where, again, like the Sam and Friends, when we have so many things that we can't watch and understand the full context of, we don't necessarily know. Maybe this wasn't a new thing for Kermit to be presented as ringleader. Maybe on the Today Show, he was always presented this way. We don't really know because we can't watch it.
I'm really interested to know how much of these skits were Sam and Friends skits too. Like,
that's true.
How much they're recycling stuff and what Sam and Friends was like at the end of its life.
I'm glad to see some of the Sam and Friends puppets gone, like Chicken Liver. I'm glad we don't ever have to like see him hanging out and doing any of these sketches.
No, that would be bad. We do see Harry the Hipster one last time. They've given him a mouth to distinguish when his mouth is open and closed, but then shortly after, the ultimate insult is given to Harry the Hipster, and he is written out of his own like starring sketch.
Yeah, jumping ahead a little bit to the Ed Sullivan Show, he is not in the version of the Art of Visual Thinking that they do on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Kermit is presented as this beatnik character.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things where it's obviously it's not a casting choice because Kermit's not an actor, but you don't cast Kermit to play a hipster beatnik guy because
he's a straight man. Kermit
he
is
does a very bad job in this sketch. And there's a number of Ed Sullivan Show sketches that I think don't land particularly well.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it feels like the audience isn't very responsive. I think sometimes maybe the audience wasn't mic'd. And other times I feel like you alluded to this earlier, that there's just sort of a smoothed over feeling to some of these, that they've just done it so many times. And maybe they were told this time, like, you got to do it faster, guys. Get through it.
Yeah.
And so their versions of Glowworm or...
Scrap Flap is fucked up in this version.
The Scrap Flap version in Ned Sullivan Show does not feel anywhere near as charming as it does on the Jack Parr program.
The original Scrap Flap, just if you haven't watched it, the Muppets in the old version look almost like sea creatures, I guess. Like deep sea, weird... alien-y kind of like coral reef guys.
They have these cool eyes that the only other puppet that I remember having these eyes is the Menomina puppet.
And Floyd has eyes like that too.
That they're just holes?
Yeah. They're just like eyelids that blink. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's there. Again, it's one of those things that if you watch these in order, those stand out very quickly as different puppets.
Mm-hmm. And then the Scrap Flap on Ed Sullivan, they're like Sesame Street Muppets. They're just boring looking.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if this is a mid to late 60s thing, but there are some not great puppets also happening on the Mike Douglas Show. They do a sketch that's just like painted hands or like hands and gloves.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm like, this would have been so much better if you had puppets on your hands.
That to me feels like a pretension thing. Like, that to me is like, the guest on the show is the artist, the Muppets, and they are trying all of these like very like heady intellectual kind of things and like pushing what you know of as puppetry. But that one's boring, and I zoned out through the hand dancing thing, definitely.
Yeah.
Then there was the Perry Como Show reindeer sketch, which I thought was really cute. That was one of my favorite ones.
It's almost a Sesame Street sketch a little bit. Like having these full puppet animals is one of those things where they weren't doing a ton of that kind of thing at the time. Like, most of these puppets are not clearly, I don't know, like they feel like the reindeer feel like they were created for that sketch in a way that a lot of these other ones are like a character playing a role inside of another sketch. How did you like the Ed Sullivan reindeer sketch?
It was basically the same with better reindeer puppets, I guess. That's probably the one I would watch. It's in color, and there is something I like more about the like chaotic earlier stuff. I think the reindeer one makes the transition to more polished, but I mean, all in all, I prefer the kind of weirdness of the Al Hurt stuff, or like or earlier, or the Mike Douglas stuff, just because that show seems so thrown together.
Yeah, let's dive into Mike Douglas, because I think there's a lot to talk about with Mike Douglas, because not only
1, 2, 3, 4, it's 7 hours of show or something.
Yeah, we had the best way to consume these. There was a lot of random clips of these shows on YouTube when I was looking for them, but people also uploaded the full episodes of each of these 4 episodes, and they're an hour and a half long. Yeah. So thankfully, didn't have to watch the full hour and a half to get the Muppet stuff, because there's a lot of other musical guests and comedians on doing other things, and the Muppets kind of pop up here and there. So we did not actually have to watch 6 hours of Muppet stuff this week on top of all the other stuff. But it was fascinating to watch the parts that I did watch outside of the Muppet stuff, to see that the Mike Douglas Show just kind of felt like a public access, turn the cameras on, we'll see what happens. Hey, should we sing? Let's sing. Hey, audience, what song should we sing? Hey, band, can you play that? Hey, do you know the words? And I'm just like, what? How does this stay on TV for years and years? It doesn't seem like you planned anything out.
For like decades. The Mike Douglas Show was on from 61 to 81, so for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was reading about it in the first episode of it. The chairs they bought were really cheap, so 2 guests on the very first episode of the Mike Douglas Show, the chairs collapsed underneath them and they fell off the stage, and that energy still exists like 7 years later by this point of the show.
There's definitely times where things are falling apart. They like will reference bringing in Rolf, and it's very clear that like Jim Henson and Frank Oz were not ready,
and they're like crawling across the floor because everybody's like looking down at the floor waiting for them. Or you see them across the studio, And then a second later, Mike Douglas is like, let's talk to Rolf now. And
Yeah,
then
he like
they just
forgets
are
that Jim Henson is Rolf.
yeah.
Because like at one point, Rolf has to pop up with the use of only one of his arms because Frank Oz has like not gotten back into position.
It's great. And that is also, this is like the year that the Jimmy Dean show went off the air. So that's why I think I mentioned earlier, it made me sad. It's like, this is like Rolf's farewell tour, or like Rolf's unemployed at this point.
Right, they were like, we gotta like, how do we get Rolf on TV?
Yeah, or something. I don't know how Mike Douglas picked the Muppets, because it doesn't seem like he really cares about them that much. Or like,
No, it does seem like just another comedian to him, which is both charming at times and
Yeah.
also weird at times, that
Yeah.
he sort of expects things of them that he would expect of a human comedian to do.
Right,
And it's like,
right.
okay, so you're having Rolf play charades now. There could be some challenges that come with that you clearly haven't thought about.
I thought that part was great, though.
Oh, I think it's great. I think it turns
He
out
gets
great. But I think
so
there's like stumbles
mad.
along the way where you're like,
Yeah.
okay, you're mad that the dog only has 4 fingers. So when he's holding up his hand to show you how many words are in this clue and you say 5, both
That-
sides of this start getting mad at each other because it's like,
Yeah.
it's 4, count my paw. It's like,
Yeah. That was my favorite part of this whole chunk of watching, was that segment where Rolf has 4 fingers, but they will not count how many fingers he has.
yeah. And like Jim Henson in one of the other Mike Douglas things is where he's talking about like, I'm not good at improv. I'm not good at this kind of thing. Like I need
Yeah.
a script. And so I think it's Jim Henson getting mad that like, guys, look at my puppet. It has 4 fingers. Understand the reality here.
And I don't know these songs. I am not a touring professional musician.
At one point, they ask him to sing a song, and he just starts singing the title of the song
Yeah.
over and over and over. And he gets through like 8 versions of it. He's like, I don't really know the words
I
to
don't
this,
know this
guys.
song. Yeah.
And then he keeps going, and no one stops him.
Oh,
There's a lot of
boy.
great moments like that throughout,
Yeah.
I think, these Mike Douglas episodes where random stuff's just happening, but also there's like very serious moments that we alluded to earlier where in one of the interviews, Florence Henderson is talking about the recent birth of her child, and she's talking about natural childbirth and how like with her last 2 kids, this is the natural childbirth and all this stuff. And Mike Douglas asks her like, oh, well, who's in the room with you? Is there a nurse? Is the doctor? Is your husband there? And like she's answering these questions, and all of a sudden Rolf just was like, hey! I'm like, she's talking about natural childbirth, and then Rolf just pops up like, I'm here. And she even asks Ralph, like, are you interested in natural childbirth? And like, that doesn't go anywhere.
No.
But I was very curious where that was gonna go. And it turns out they just like, it was time to sing a song. So he
Yeah.
had to pop up. And I think somebody
Yeah.
gave Jim Henson the cue that like, hey, it's time to sing the song. Why don't you pop up there? And the same thing happens later when they have another woman on who's the author of a book called So You Want to Be a Working Mother.
This
And
is the part
she's-
I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, and it's like a very progressive like conversation to happen in
An
mid-60s.
extremely intelligent woman who's like laying out all this shit that you're like, oh, the world is horrible. And
Yeah, and kind of like I was waiting for like the shoe to drop and for like Mike Douglas to say something awful in that
Yeah.
moment, and he was very good. I
he
think that
never
he's-
really does. Yeah.
No, he's asking some questions that men in the 60s are going to ask. Like, well, what did your husband think when you said you wanted to be a working mother?
Yeah.
It's like, she very quickly is like, he didn't care. Like, I told him when we got married, this is going to be what it's going to
Yeah.
be. So,
I mean, I think she says like one of the most important things is to like find a partner who will support you in this and help you with this stuff.
yeah, which we're like, again, we were talking about the era of Mad Men. Like,
Yeah.
the examples you see
1966.
on Mad Men is not quite that sort of thing. And so it's interesting to see that. But again, in the middle of this discussion about the working mother, Mike Douglas is just like, speaking of the kitchen and cooking
Yeah.
food, here's a
Women-
Muppet chef.
Working mothers are going to have to be able to cook healthy meals for their children and fast. And then they throw it to like a proto-Swedish chef.
Chef
blows
Bernardi
stuff up.
makes a
Chef
60-second
Bernardi.
salad flambe, which
Yeah.
is also maybe one of the worst sketches
Yeah.
throughout everything we watched. It's not funny. No one in the room seems to be enjoying it that much.
Nope.
And it also seems like something kind of maybe went wrong with the joke of the thing exploding. So it's, you
Yeah, there's a few
interrupted.
times where he like repeats something and you're kind of like, well, like, did you not have a prop down there that you were supposed to have or something like that?
Yeah, it definitely felt like something went wrong in the sketch. And again, just not worth interrupting this very serious conversation about working mothers.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to watch just TV from the 60s, regardless of the Muppet side of things. But seeing that conversation happen with Florence Henderson and Lois Benjamin talking about working mothers, and then 2 episodes later, you have the worst person. You have Jerry Lester, he's
just a comedian.
He's just a comedian.
Me, like, this guy's a creep. And sometimes I feel like our bars for certain levels of like finding things offensive are different. And I was like, oh, well, who knows what he's
I think also
about.
like when you watch historical things, I think everyone has a certain level of, yeah, of course they're going to be creepy. It's the 60s. Of course they're going to say
butt
this.
or something like that.
But no, this man literally says, any woman over 9.
Yeah. And
I'm like,
a 12-year-old girl sitting on his lap throughout an entire segment.
And he has,
mama.
in that segment, he like goes into the crowd and is talking to a 12-year-old boy and is like making fun of him as if he's this little nerd or whatever like that, which, you know, he kind of was.
He is a little nerd, yeah.
But like mocking this kid, clearly seeing this kid as a little kid, ask him how old he is. He says he's 12. He's mocking this kid being a junior high. And then he asks the girl next to him, how old are you? And she says she's also 12.
She's 12 too, buddy.
And he shoves the boy off of his knee and says, well, you get up here then. And I'm like, what? No. Like the moment, it's so like there's never been a worse, clear example of the different treatment.
Yep.
In that moment of like, okay, so the 12-year-old boy is the junior high little nerd kid, and you hear this little girl is 12 years old, and that's your first reaction, and it's real gross, and he continues to be awful and gross throughout that episode.
He's not funny, and everybody in the crowd seems to hate him, and Mike Douglas introduces him as like his hero, basically.
It definitely seems like they're like old war buddies that like I feel like he's Mike Douglas's friend that Mike Douglas has to apologize for after he leaves the party.
Yeah.
Where he's always like, guys, sorry about Jerry. You know Jerry. That's
and that
just
kind of
him.
happens when he's talking to those kids, because Mike Douglas runs up and he's like, you should maybe go talk to some of those people who are a little bit closer to your age up in the audience. And then he gives the kids Polaroid cameras.
Yeah, he's like, hey, sorry about the creep. Here's some free Polaroid cameras that are probably $400 back in the 60s. Like, we took a photo of you on this guy's lap. Sorry about that, but here's some free cameras.
Here's also the camera, too. Like, this isn't the Jerry Lester podcast, but that episode is fascinating because his jokes all flop and nobody laughs at him. And he looks at the audience and he's like, you guys just don't get it. Or like, why are you being so mean to me?
There's like, he immediately comes on.
Jokes.
Yeah, like he immediately comes on and says something that I didn't quite follow or understand why the audience turned on him.
Yeah, they boo him over Valley of the Dolls, and I don't understand.
Yeah, and a few minutes later, he's trying to get back on their good side, and Mike Douglas like calls it out. He's like, "Oh, I think they like you now," and they don't. I think they like immediately don't like him, and that kind of sticks out. And I think the only sort of redeeming thing he does is he does a sketch with the Muppet robot.
Which
That's
is fine.
okay. Like if it had just been that on its own, I think I wouldn't have hated this man so much. But seeing him just being himself, and then also seeing him in the they have a segment later where they bring in Polly Kramer of Polly's Pointers column, which I'm guessing was maybe popular in the 60s, to do essentially life hacks, things you would see on TikTok these days of like how to use a potato sack for this thing.
One thing that is, just to interrupt you, sorry, real quick. One thing that's so interesting about watching these old shows is how much nothing has changed.
Oh yeah, as far as like the type of thing that is interesting. Like obviously the tips have changed quite a bit because one of her tips is to put like a Post-it note over your key ignition in your car that reminds you to wear a seatbelt.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And so you don't forget to put your seatbelt on. Make sure you put this note over the ignition so that way you can't put your key in without thinking about your seatbelt. And I'm like, oh, that was a time where people had to be reminded that, hey, seatbelts exist now. You should probably wear one. But also in that segment, one, they're pretty terrible to Polly because most of her tips were for like housewives, and you're in the middle of 3 male comedians and a puppet dog. So she was not given the environment to succeed.
Respect she was,
No, but it starts off with her trying to teach you how to give medicine to your cat. And she has a stuffed cat there that she puts in a brown paper bag and says, like, hold your cat like this to give them medicine.
I thought that was like his joke setup or something, but that's really
I thought so too. And then I realized, oh, this is what it is. Yeah. But then this is like the most hostile I've ever seen Rolf. One, like, she's like, okay, so you put your cat in the paper bag, and he's like, and throw it in the river. And I was like, oh, okay. And then she hands him the stuffed cat, and he beats it to death against the table.
This lady's cat, she probably made that herself.
And then I thought for sure at one point she's teaching you how to like bust open walnuts. And so she's like, put walnuts in a bag and hit it with a hammer. And
made
they
me so
give
nervous.
Rolf the hammer.
Yeah.
Like, out of all the people standing there on that stage that should be trying to hit things with a hammer, maybe not the puppet dog who can't see anything. And they have, like, her hands are holding the bag in front of him. And I'm like, Ralph is going to hit this woman's hand with a hammer. It's
That's
gonna
amazing.
happen.
It was amazing. I wish that Muppets still just appeared randomly on things all the time like this.
Yeah, and not in such a, I don't know, promotional way. Like, obviously, they're there to sort of promote themselves as a brand. But nowadays, because the nature of talk shows, it's a lot of, hey, we're here because we have a movie coming out that we need to talk about a little bit. But you don't get as much of that Muppets just hanging out kind of vibe.
And you've mentioned before that, maybe not on the show, maybe just to me, that one problem with Muppet appearances is that it's a crapshoot as to whether or not the person's going to play along with it or not. And I feel like in these appearances, the veneer is so thin because you can see Jim kind of in some of these skits, or like they can clearly see him down there, that it kind of like the fact that the Muppets and Jim are so interconnected kind of eliminates that a little bit, because like he's a famous dude, like you're talking to this famous dude and like you know his deal a little bit, and so even if you do joke about it, it's like they're acknowledging their puppets all the time, the audience knows they're puppets, so it was a much more like organic integration of that I thought really worked.
And I think some of that kept going into the 70s and 80s. And again, maybe we'll realize that this was sort of around the same time Jim Henson died is when some of this stuff starts changing. But it's definitely a thing that there was a push maybe 10 years ago at this point for Cookie Monster to host SNL. And I think that would have been genius to just have him as the celebrity who's hosting and showing up in sketches, playing characters.
Yeah.
Like, I think Kermit probably would be the better choice than Cookie Monster, but regardless, like having a Muppet just be the host of SNL, it's sort of like with the Kermit being on The Masked Singer recently. That's the way you use these characters in a way that feels very natural. You're not getting that as much these days with the Muppets, and I think that's a mixture of sort of the landscape of media in general right now, but it's also the way Disney is maybe trying to control the image a little bit
clamped
more.
down on the characterization of them and like what they are. I'd love to talk about Marty Allen and how his whole thing, he's a comedian too, his whole thing seemed to be that he was itchy, and people thought that was hilarious.
Well, and he was the ugly counterpart to some other more handsome comedian.
Yes, yeah.
It was like they had a comedy duo with a guy named Steve, and he seemed to have I think "Hello there" was his catchphrase. He's, again, I don't understand him, and I think that's obviously a time thing. I was not alive in the 60s to really understand the rise of Marty Allen, but
No.
he's fascinating in that he does not seem to have ever heard of the Muppets.
No.
He doesn't really care about them too much, but
he
he's
maybe
willing
also
to play.
thinks Rolf is a real dog or something. Like he would look at them, like when that little critter, that little spider pops up and like crawls behind him. You're not really sure if he's like so drunk that he doesn't like. Perhaps there is something afoot here, and this is a real little spider guy.
Yeah, it's like they have that little, before any other Muppets like really show up, they have that little spider guy with the long neck pop up.
The
like,
Snurf.
throughout multiple episodes. And the first time he shows up for Marty Allen really is just like, what was that? Like, I'm a little concerned. Like, and then Ralph pops up. He's like, oh, it was my Snurf. Have you seen my Snurf? And he's like, who are you? What is what was that thing? No, somebody needs to tell me what that was.
He does make a couple. He does suggest that he is drunk a couple times during that episode, so that could have been happening.
There is a nice distance between the Marty Allen, Jerry Lester sort of like weird vibe stuff happening and the Muppets that I feel like Jim Henson was maybe smart enough to keep Rolf out of certain situations that like he could have joined in on certain jokes that thankfully he didn't, that we don't get any sort of like super cringy Rolf moments.
And like we mentioned earlier, every episode the Muppets performers come out and do an interview, and they're just like the most buttoned down, careful, cerebral people. They're like, I think what we would probably call woke to some degree at their time, where they have realized that there are certain things that the old ways of doing things were bad for a lot of different reasons, and they are trying to elevate things to a different level and just
Right.
acting like a different species basically than all the other weirdos on, or like the disgusting old comedians and stuff on the show. Those are all very fascinating.
Yeah, which is something I liked seeing on the Mike Douglas show that we didn't get on the Ed Sullivan show clips, is that interaction and that like personality coming through, because there's so many interview segments on Mike Douglas. But seeing some of that was actually pretty refreshing. That like not only were the conversations happening about the working mothers and the natural childbirth, but then you also have Jim Henson and Frank Oz seeming like nice, normal human beings. That you're like, okay, cool. Not everyone in the 60s was terrible. One of the sketches I hated, which maybe is just a trend of things I don't like in media, is the glutton.
Oh,
where
yeah.
it's just another puppet eating things and being kind of gross. It made me uncomfortable. I had a hard time watching it, and apparently Muppets eating things is not my jam.
Fabric touching real food or something, or like,
Well,
the
like
fabric.
so the thing is, I think I don't mind Cookie Monster in the like the
Yeah.
rah, 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 whatever, but when they
Yeah.
try to like make it seem like these
They're
puppets
chewing.
have a digestive system and they're
Wow.
gooey and wet and like all this stuff, I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I don't want to think of the organs inside of the glutton puppet.
That's the last one on your playlist, so I kind of zoned out for that whole one because I didn't like him. And by that point, you've gotten like a whole run of Ed Sullivan ones I wasn't crazy about.
That's where the most apparent shift happens into the late 60s stuff, where it's just kind of washing over you in a way where you're like, I guess I like this because there's puppets here. But after Monster Eats Machine and Rolf and Jimmy Dean, which are both great. Like,
Well,
you
Rolf
get
and
this,
Jimmy Dean is the final appearance of Rolf and Jimmy Dean together, which will be more sad after next week how we talk about Jimmy Dean for so long.
which
but-
is a very sweet moment. And then we start this run of Santa Claus with Arthur Godfrey, Business, the Monster Trash Can Dance.
that one was so boring. Monster Trash Can
Yeah.
Dance did not work at all.
No, and then you get the lesser Scrap Flap, the Christmas Reindeer, a Change of Face, which is all right.
Phenomena, which is fine.
Yes, and you get like a weird Big Bird sketch that's very much late 60s, early 70s vibe, where
Yeah.
they're just dancing around to a song.
Big Bird doesn't talk at all. He's
No.
just, yeah.
But it's clear that like Big Bird is now a celebrity in a way that was interesting to see that shift happen. But then you get into, some of those sketches that just don't, I don't know, they feel like they're missing something
Yeah.
that those earlier ones definitely had.
You know, the What Kind of Fool Am I is the one where Grover shows up.
Right.
That one, very good. And I think it's just like, because Grover's kind of Fozzie Bear in a little bit, similar
Yeah.
voice. And like, he's the
He's,
goofy guy.
he's like a
to Kermit's
meaner
straight-
Fozzie.
Yeah, he is. He's like a more oblivious to how his actions impact people. But that's a Kermit as a straight man situation, which you hadn't seen for a long time based on the other TV appearances. That worked really well, and kind of has a lot of characters that you'll recognize later coming in and out of it. But then there's like the trash can one, which I said, which is just, you have to think too hard about it. I don't even know what's going on. And business, which is so... It's a bunch of little critters saying business, and then this other little critter comes up and he's like, peace, love.
Yeah.
It's just
It's trying
too
to be really smart, and it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it lands very well. And I think the only one of those like later runs that really works for me is the Wild String Quartet, where we have the Menomina guy.
Sequel to Phenomena, kind of.
Yeah, and
That
he
one's fun.
shows up as the drummer for a string
Yeah.
quartet. And part of it that made me laugh a lot was like they expect him to be a violin player. And he's like, I thought we wanted less violins on television.
That was pretty good. But this I'm also wondering now, because Sesame Street had started, I wonder if a lot of their attention was on Sesame Street, and because I think Ed Sullivan, he would like discover acts. That was kind of like his thing, and bring them
Yeah.
onto his show. I think he just loved the Muppets, so they probably kept, because these are very late appearances for them, so they probably just kept coming on for him, maybe.
Yeah.
Or like,
I think he's also just, he was a very established person, and it was a
Totally.
big deal to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. So
yeah.
I think Ed Sullivan needed the Muppets as much as the Muppets probably needed Ed Sullivan at that point, because like it does feel sometimes like he's looking for another Beatles in some of these
Yeah.
appearances. Like he's like, hey, how about this one, guys? Is this the next Beatles on Ed Sullivan moment?
Oh, I'm just now realizing that 1971 is when the Ed Sullivan Show ended. So
Yeah. He was on his way out.
Okay. So there's 1948 to 1971, which is a ridiculously long amount of time for a TV show to be on. Okay. You're probably right then. He was trying to be cool with the kids.
Yeah, and it definitely feels I feel like some of his introductions feel very strongly in that direction of just like, did you like it? Please like it.
Every time he literally says, here's one for all the kids out there. Or like all the kids in the audience. Okay, so that's a sweaty old show on its way out. And that's why the skits are sweaty. That makes sense. Well, yeah, then after this we move into the Sesame Street era, and we're only like 6 years out from Muppet Show at this point, or like 8 years or something like that.
Yeah, and part of me wonders, as well as like some of these later 60s sketches, if that's sort of that split personality thing of Jim Henson, where it's like, okay, I'm focusing a lot on the kid stuff for Sesame Street, so that part of my brain is focused on this. The other part of my brain, the artsy part of my brain, needs an outlet. So let's do this giant puppet face, and let's do weird existential drunk Muppets on the Tonight Show. And so I think that's maybe those two parts of Jim Henson's brain having to be split, whereas on later Muppet things, they get to come together a little bit more. This week's Muppet of the Week, Grover. That blue, lovable, childlike, gruff-voiced thing.
He's a monster. He's
a
firmly
monster.
Established as a monster.
He's the monster at the end of the book. There's a monster at the end of this book that we all had as children. He was designed by Jim Henson and built by Don Saleen. So I think he is one that we can talk about in a lot of ways. There's versions of Grover that exist before Grover existed in what you would picture as Grover. The first appearance of Proto Grover, which is like some people on the internet call him Proto Grover, is as Gleep, who is one of the monsters that's trying to steal toys in the Santa sketch on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1967. And yeah, he doesn't have much of a personality at this point. He
Different voice.
Yeah, and he also is like a yellowish, greenish, dirty looking Muppet.
Yeah.
But he does pop up again on that later Ed Sullivan sketch that you referenced with Kermit, where he is acting more like Grover. He's still not like firmly established, the Grover we know and love, but he's definitely more like getting closer to the Grover we know and love. That sketch was in 1970, and 1970 is also right around the same era that Frank Oz fully took over as full-time Grover on Sesame Street. This is when they started to like really hone in on the look of Grover and make him blue with his pink nose.
Was he ever a different color on Sesame Street?
Yes. In the early days, in the first season of Sesame Street in 1969, much like Oscar was orange, Grover was that same like ugly, yellow, green, dirty Muppet look. And for a while, he didn't even have a name. He doesn't get a name early on in Sesame Street. He's just known as like Fuzzy Face, people were calling him. And he's in a sketch with Kermit where Kermit a couple times it's just like, yeah, the hairy one, the fuzzy one. Like he doesn't call him out by name at all. And then it's like 25, 30 episodes into Sesame Street, they gave him the name of Grover. And at this point, he still doesn't look like the Grover we know. So there was a transition point where that puppet was called Grover. And then in the second season is when they really changed him to look like Grover as we know him now. And Grover hasn't like really changed that much since then. Like since 1970, pretty much look the same. His fur's been shaggier at times. It's been shorter at times. His eyes get a few little tweaks here and there, but pretty much been that Grover. And I think most people are most familiar with Grover because of the monster at the end of this book, or Super Grover, or Waiter Grover. And I think that's where most people, if they're thinking about like, who is Grover? What does Grover do? Those are the three sort of examples of that they can pull from. But Frank Oz was the main performer from 1970 through 1998 for Grover, and then sort of on and off occasionally until 2012. I think like when we talked about Fozzie and Frank Oz, it was that same kind of thing where he would occasionally pop in and play him, but from 98 till now, it's Eric Jacobson again, who was the same guy who took over most of Frank Oz's roles before. And yeah, I think it's one of those things where we've talked about Muppet performers taking over for other ones, and I think this is one of those best case scenarios where Eric Jacobson is just sort of Frank Oz again. Like, so many of his characters that he took over for him don't feel any different. They don't sound that much different. They just feel like an extension of the Frank Oz performance. Some fun, quick little facts about Grover. There's less about him out there in the world than there is about Fozzie and some of the other Muppets, because with Sesame Street, they kind of keep a consistent thing going and don't change it up too much.
Right.
So he's had less personality changes through the years. But he does apparently in interviews claim that Kermit is his best friend, which is interesting.
That's sad because I don't think it's the other way around, bro.
It doesn't. It seems like Kermit would say probably Fozzie is his best friend. But this is like as recently as like 2012 or something like that. Grover was claiming that Kermit is his best friend when asked.
Oh no!
And I'm like, man, he's not even like on Sesame Street that much. You should find somebody that like is around more. And as far as family members go, Grover has a mom. We know this, but that's the only family that they've ever established really for Grover is his mom. But his mom is like present in a lot of media, both in books and on Sesame Street.
Does his mom look like him with like curlers in her hair?
Now, yeah, she pretty much is like most Muppet parents, is the same puppet with a wig. But early on, when she first appeared, it was like 1972, they used the old Grover puppet for her. So she, or at least a very similar version. So when she first appeared, she was still the yellow, dirty, old-looking Muppet, and he was already blue at this point. But then now, if you look at her, I think they've done this with most, like I said, parent Muppets. She is just Grover with glasses and a wig. I'm curious how you feel about Grover, because I think I'm kind of middling on Grover.
I love Grover. His voice is hilarious, and he just looks so funny, and his arms are so long, and he flails around so good, and he makes that guy so mad when he's the waiter.
He is one of those sort of like quintessential Muppets. When you think of like a Muppet design and what makes a Muppet puppet really good, he has a lot of those features with like the shape of his head and like you said, his arms. He's like very flaily. That was one of the things I looked up. He did change a little bit early on. He didn't have as much of like shoulders and like definition. Like his head just kind of met his arms in this weird way early on, and eventually they gave him more shoulders and a little bit more flaily arms. That I think, again, is one of those things that works really well in his design. And I think Super Grover never really worked for me.
I don't care for Super Grover.
Yeah, it doesn't really click. But I think the Waiter Grover is a sketch that no matter how many times you watch a different Waiter Grover sketch, you kind of know where it's going. You know how the formula works, but it still lands pretty well.
And I think Grover is not a baby like Elmo is. Elmo is like a Grover who has been extrapolated to his most baby-like and annoying. But Grover, like when he does interviews, he is like on it and he's like smart and he can make a joke back at you. And Elmo just is like, oh, I'm so cute.
I read something that they essentially intended for Grover to be like a 4-year-old, but I think you're right that in that he often seems older than that. And in one interview, I think they asked Grover sort of how old are you? And he said, I'm older than a bread box and young enough that I still have to live with my mommy.
That's a great way to put it. For like all of those Sesame Street characters. Like they're all supposed to be kids, but they all have grown man voices.
It was funny to think about that when in 2020, obviously, a lot of the Sesame Street sketches had to switch over to people recording them in their houses. Yeah. And Grover specifically like made me laugh because he's recording it in a super nice kitchen and living room area.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's very clearly the Muppet performer's very nice house. Like that's Eric Jacobson's really nice house.
Cookie Monster is the same. He has like a mansion.
I understand that they can't be in the same places they are when they're on Sesame Street, but it's very weird now that I'm seeing like an Architectural Digest version of Grover's house. I'm just like, that's where Grover lives. I don't understand. Aside from all of these frickin' TV shows we had to watch this week, which I don't think is going to get too much easier going forward. I think we'll have some weeks where we just got to watch one movie, but next week's going to be a lot of things to watch as well. What else were you watching and enjoying this week, Sam? I think one of our answers might be the same answer.
Yeah, Justice League.
I think Justice League. We like as far as things to watch that are long. We had like 6 hours of Mike Douglas show and 4 hours of Justice League to watch this week.
This is a brutal week for both of us. Yeah, because we're both on two different podcasts talking about Justice League, which I feel sick that that's the thing I enjoyed this week, but I watched so little else that I guess it has to be the Justice League. I don't necessarily recommend that you watch it, but to me it's interesting because it is like a movie event. Like nothing like this has ever happened before, where and it's horrible, where fan outrage and actor outrage, which is not as horrible, fueled this remake of a movie 2 years after the movie came out or whatever.
4 years.
4 years. Jeez.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe that it was that long ago. but like you look at the interviews with the actors who said like the guy who played Cyborg, whose name is escaping me.
Ray Fisher.
Yeah, being like they screwed up. Like this was bad.
I almost didn't believe it for so long. Like so many people were talking about this as a way of like there was a good version of this movie that Warner Brothers ruined. I didn't necessarily believe that. I thought it was like, oh yeah, of course it's what you're going to say when your movie comes out and nobody likes it. But that's maybe apparently was true.
Yeah, but when you see how Ray Fisher and Jason Momoa specifically were treated by the final cut of the original Justice League movie, it's like he went back and was like, Jason Momoa, you're the dumb guy. Now, Joss Whedon was like, Jason Momoa, you're the dumb guy. Ray Fisher, you're brooding and angry all the time and you can't control yourself. That's your new characters. But that's not what the original intention was, and not all of the hours of stuff they filmed. But don't necessarily sit down and watch it for 4 hours.
Yes, if you're on the fence of like, I kind of wanted to watch it, but I'm not sure, it is better than you probably think it's going to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, not necessarily rush out and watch it right now. As far as what I remembered, I did watch something else besides Muppets and Justice League this week. I started watching the show Staged, which is David Tennant and Michael Sheen doing basically a Zoom call show. They recorded it during lockdown. There's 2 seasons of it out now. It's really good. And I think if anything has handled this sort of lockdown art creating well, it is this. And the premise is that they were going to be putting on a play, and then lockdown happened. So their director, who's this like bumbling fool, decides, well, what if we just did the rehearsals over Zoom? And then when lockdown ends, we'll be ready to go and we'll have a play and people will be ahead of the curve. And it does not go well. Let's just but there's a lot of really good celebrity cameos that pop up as a part of this too. I won't spoil more of them, but Samuel L. Jackson shows up at some point, and a very good one. And yeah, it's just a good show that feels like you're watching people on a Google Hangout, but very good, funny people. So I would highly recommend that. It's on Hulu now if you want to watch that. But next week, Sam, we got a lot of Jimmy Dean to watch.
I'm not going to have time to watch shit. I'm going to have to watch. How many are there? Do you know?
So I've got about, right now, like 40 different clips. And they range from like 2 minutes to 8 minutes sometimes. Okay. So there's a lot.
That's okay.
But there's not as many as there could be, because there's like hundreds of episodes of Jimmy Dean's show that I could not track down. But we'll get a good sample size of what this show was like. And I'm also going to try to dig up some other Rolf appearances from the 60s. But he was on some stuff that I don't think exists anywhere anymore, so I'm not sure that we're going to be able to watch those. But as always, if you want to watch Jimmy Dean show and other Rolf appearances with us as we head into our Rolf Spectacular next week, the playlist will be tweeted out at our Twitter account, which is @KermitmNetPod, which you go follow. Let us know your feelings on any of this TV appearances or Tinkerdee if you watch them along with us. But you can also follow me at Matthew Gatos.
And I'm at Slam Schultz.
Big thanks to our friend Tuna for putting together our theme song, and to Cassie Wilson for singing the theme song. And as always, keep believing.
Keep pretending.